Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching by Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
I think we're going to talk about Sotah, which is just as funny. We're in Parshat Be'elotecha, but because of everything that happened this morning in services, there wasn't like a formal sermon slot, and so I wanted to be able to talk about the Sotah ritual, because I think that it's especially important when our Torah teaches us lessons that are uncomfortable for us to learn about them and to learn about why they might be in our Torah and why we might come back to them every year, and why they were put into our Torah, right? There are many ways in which we imagine the Torah was put together, redacted, etc., whether you believe that was by God, by Moshe, or by people. There are still many ways in which things could have been left out or put in. Doesn't matter how it was written. And yet things like the Sotah ritual and many, many other stories, right? The stories of rape, stories of any number of stories that make you uncomfortable in the Torah, we still have them in the Torah. And lots of rabbis ask, well, okay, so now what, right? Do we not teach them because we don't believe in these things anymore? Or do we teach them davka because we want people to understand why they are in our Torah and to be able to learn from them? So though we're not still in Parshat Naso, we're going to learn a little bit about the Sotah ritual. There are 10 copies and 14 people. So maybe
I already have my copy.
Oh, Marshall already has his copy. Marshall's a straight A student. Always comes prepared. Marshall's already done that. Marshall should just teach this text. He's already done the learning. So the first thing that we're going to do is just read through the Sotah ritual. I'm sure that you know the general premise of what the Sotah ritual was, but we're going to read through the actual details of what the ritual was and how it came to be. Okay. I'm just going to read because if people are on Zoom, they won't be able to hear you if you read. So I'm going to read, and then I'm going to ask you after this first paragraph what you're gleaning already from this experience. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, if any man's wife has gone astray and broken faith with him, very interesting in the Hebrew that it says ish, right? It doesn't actually say any like it does in the Hebrew, but it's emphasizing all men. So ish, all men, any men. There's not really a great translation in English, is why it says any, but I just wanted to point out that it just uses the category of ish twice to emphasize all. And that a man has had sex with her unbeknownst to her husband, and she keeps secret the fact that she has defiled herself without being forced, and there is no witness against her. But a fit of jealousy comes over him, and he has wrought about the wife who has defiled herself. Or if a fit of jealousy comes over one, and he has wrought up about his wife, although she has not defiled herself. We're going to read what happens next. So what is this? What are the bases for this Sotah ritual? Suspicion. Okay, great. Suspicion. What else?
And it's a man's world to be able to determine this.
Yeah, very good. It's a man's world to determine, and not necessarily know, but to just have a hunch. And then we're going to see what comes after that there is this suspicion that something might have happened by a man, right? Only by a man. And therefore, now the woman's going to have to go through what she's going to go through, and we're going to read about it in a second. Yeah, Deborah.
This only occurred to me reading this time.
Yeah.
I deal with a lot of cases of families who there's a lot of domestic violence going on. And it's sort of positive thing maybe that there's this ritual that you are supposed to go to rather than, just beat your wife at home.
Yeah. Yeah, so Deborah's making a really great point that in a world where there always has been, obviously, violence in the home based off of suspicion or based off of just jealousy, which is the word that is used here, that a man has this fit of jealousy, a spirit of jealousy, literally, that maybe there's something actually quite beautiful, well, beautiful is not the right word, practical in having a ritual that is going to separate the woman out from his emotions and his rage such that there is not domestic violence that might erupt in the home. One of the commentaries that we'll get to is going to allude to that exactly. That even though this wasn't necessarily a ritual that women looked forward to, obviously, that it was better than the alternative of potentially staying in a home where she was never going to be able to say, no, I didn't, don't hurt me, right? But rather now this ritual was going to somehow, quote, prove something that then she might be protected. Do you want to say something? Correct. Right. Thank you for pointing that out. This idea that, of course, it's going man to woman because men could have many different wives, whereas women could only have one husband, right? So that is the reason that it's going in that direction. Thank you for mentioning that. Anything else that we're noticing here before we go to the actual ritual?
Just
yeah, Marshall.
The words, last words in that first sentence.
Yes. Yeah.
I know there's a concept of ilav as a trespass or, with sacrilege in the temple itself. And that unfaithfulness here.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you asking or are you saying? Are you telling?
I'm just saying that.
Well,
yeah.
She desecrated the marriage.
Right. So I think there's a connection here, but between this translation that you're giving that has connection to the temple and also to the desecration of a holy union, which is in this case the marriage. Right. Great. Yeah. A fee, you said?
Yes, I don't know if 1/10 of an ephah of barley is a lot, but I mean, it's not just
True.
like, okay, you can make wild accusations, like you want to do this, lay the barley down too.
Great. I don't think we've gotten there yet, have we?
No, we haven't. You read.
Okay. I was like, did we get to the ephah part yet? Okay, great. Hold that thought. Yeah, Rebecca. Right. There's in both of these cases that are written here in this top part in the last sentence, right? There's suspicion on both sides, right? It's not necessarily the case that there's ever a reveal, so to speak, of what happens. It's she's hiding it. If anything had happened, it was hidden. Yeah.
But it's clear because there's no witness.
Rabbi Berenbaum says one witness. We'll go with one witness. Okay. All right. So now let's go to the bottom part here. So Bamidbar 5 verses 15 through 25. So the Hebrew here is going to. I'm going to read the English, but you're going to have to flip the page. All the Hebrew is on one page, but the English is divided up. The man shall bring his wife to the priest. Okay. So first of all, we all know from things like Tzara'at that a priest was not just like a rabbi is in a community, right? The priest was kind of a catch-all for any kind of advice giving. It could be medical. In this case, it could be relational. It often didn't end with the priest when it had to do with like judicial pieces, right? There was actually a system for that. But in this particular case, going to the priest first to know what to do, right? The priest was the first stop. I think my wife had an affair. I'm going to go to the priest, right? Now, that's not to say, by the way, that people don't come to their rabbis and say, I have a feeling that my marriage is breaking up over X, Y, and Z incident, and to hear, pastoral counseling, I guess you could say, on that matter, right? That's not to say that doesn't happen. However, the priest is about to give this entire, really just over the top ritual for this man to have his wife do so that something can potentially bubble up, no pun intended, as to whether or not she is guilty. Okay, so whether or not that was the priest's place, it was back then. Glad I don't do that today. And he shall bring as an offering for her 1/10 of an ephah. So this gets back to what Deborah was saying, that there is some kind of a cost, right? That if he has suspicion that he has to kind of put his money where his mouth is, he does have to somehow go about giving something of himself to go through this process. No oil shall be poured upon it, and no frankincense shall be laid on it, because it's a meal offering of jealousy, a meal offering of remembrance, which recalls wrongdoing. So because this particular sacrifice it's bland, right? Nothing gets put on it to make it any more special than it needs to be. The priest shall take sacred water in an earthen vessel, and taking some of the earth that is on the floor of the tabernacle. So here again, Marshall connects back to the temple. The priest shall put it into the water. So now I just want to point out, everything we are about to read is just going to sound gross, because it was, right? There was nothing medical about this. There's no, like an education, when a kid does something wrong, you're supposed to have a punishment that matches the action. This clearly has nothing to do with whether or not she had an affair, but they're going to make her feel uncomfortable, and somehow that magical potion is going to get her to show physically or potentially emotionally whether or not she is guilty. So you take this water, you put it in this thing, then you take dirt and you put it into the water. After he has made the woman stand before God, the priest shall bear the woman's head, right? So now you're going to actually uncover her, right, in a way that was seen as immodest, right? Her hair was covered before because she was married, and now you're going to take her head covering off and place upon her hands the meal offering of remembrance, which is a meal offering of jealousy. And in the priest's hands shall be the water of bitterness that induces the spell. So what's happening to the woman here?
Being humiliated.
Yeah, she's being humiliated, right? And still we don't know whether or not she actually did anything wrong, right? The husband assumes that she did something wrong, and so now we're going to humiliate her so that hopefully we find out if she did something wrong. That's interesting.
What?
Chametz. Well, that's interesting. Chametz.
Like, rising.
Yeah, that's it. That's very interesting. That's what I thought you were going to say, and I hadn't thought about this before, is that when has anybody had a get ceremony or been witness to a get ceremony? No. Okay. So when a get is given, it's the same stance for the woman, right? She's actually given the get in her hand in a similar kind of fashion, which is actually where I thought you were going, Deborah. But the chametz was a real turn. The priest shall adjure the woman, saying to her, if no man has lain with you, if you have not gone astray in defilement while married to your husband, be immune to harm from this water of bitterness that induces the spell. So if you didn't sleep with another man and therefore you're not guilty, hopefully you have a really strong stomach and nothing's going to happen to you, and then we're going to prove that you are not guilty. Logical consequence? Probably not. Yeah, Ellen.
Depends how much of the earth they put into the water that's making her drink, because if it's a little bit, maybe you get by. A lot, then it could
That's
be
true.
a problem.
Right. That's true. It's probably not great to have any dirt in your water, but you're right. There's levels of dirt water that one can probably sustain. If you have gone astray while married to your husband and have defiled yourself, if a man other than your husband has had carnal relations with you, killed bug. Here the priest shall administer the curse of adjuration to the woman, as the priest goes on to say to the woman, may God make you a curse and an imprecation among your people, as Adonai causes your thigh to sag and your belly to distend. What do you think that could mean? And then Rabbi Behrman can tell us what it means. But what do you think that could mean? That your thigh sags and your belly distends.
Pregnant?
Okay. So it could be that you look pregnant, or that you somehow show signs of pregnancy. Rabbi Behrman, do you want to share with us what you think it is?
No, let me hear.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody else have an explanation?
I'm not feeling comfortable with this whole thing.
Yeah, that's exactly why we're learning it. The other yeah, go ahead. The thigh sagging piece, what I've heard, and again, everything that we are assuming about this, we don't know for a fact that it was real. So what I'm about to say is just one commentary. It's not necessarily accurate or truth, but that if there had been a baby I shouldn't say baby, if there had been any cells or fetus, that this would actually cause a miscarriage, that this was some kind of euphemism for miscarriage. So whether your belly distended to either make it look like you were pregnant or to make it obvious that you were, right, whether real or not, or that you then lost a pregnancy, that could be what they're talking about here in euphemistic language. Again, no one knows whether or not that is accurate or true, but all to say, none of this was good, right? Nothing was going to happen to her body that was comfortable or good for her, and all at the expense of suspicion from her husband. And the woman, may this water that induces the spell enter your body, causing the belly to distend and the thigh to sag, and the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. So the woman has to actually somewhat agree back, right? Has to actually say like, yeah, all right, I guess I'm in this. This is what we're doing. And to go back to Deborah's point, is that better than what could have happened to her had she stayed home and the husband thought that she was guilty of something? Maybe. Seems kind of ridiculous and horrific to have to choose between those two things, but maybe. He is, I keep skipping lines. Verse 23, the priest shall put these curses down in writing and rub it off into the water of bitterness. So more stuff going in. He is to make the woman drink the water of bitterness that induces the spell, so that the spell inducing water may enter into her to bring on bitterness. Then the priest shall take from the woman's hand the meal offering of jealousy, elevate the meal offering before the Lord, and present it on the altar. So that's the whole thing. And then it goes on, obviously, in Bamidbar to discuss what happens when she's innocent. Which is lovely and not lovely, it's good that that's in there, not lovely what happens, but good that that's in there. I didn't bring it today because I just wanted to focus on the ritual itself. Other than this is bad, why did we do this? Why is this in our Torah? Any thoughts on this that people have? Yeah, Deborah. Great. So there's an element here of the husband does have some role, but it's not seen as really a prominent role at all. I think she's guilty. I'm going to bring her forward. As Deborah just mentioned, it's possible it was private. It's also possible that it was public. There's definitely humiliation involved, and he's kind of handing it all over. Like, here's my wife, and here's the stuff of which you can do this ritual, and I'm just going to hand it all over. Let me know what comes out on the other side. Did you have a hand, Rebecca? Was that your hand? No? Okay. Okay, let's look at a few commentaries, because I do want us to see a few pieces here. We're not going to look at the Mishnah Sotah piece just because it will take us down a rabbit hole. We don't have time for a rabbit hole, but I want you to see it. There's a very problematic piece in Mishnah Sotah, that says that people shouldn't teach their daughters Torah because it will fill them with knowledge, basically, but they say that it will fill them with foolishness, right? And the Gemara actually goes on to describe it, to be able to actually explain it away because of the Sotah ritual, which is really interesting. So just, it's there if you'd like to look at it later. We're not gonna go down that rabbit hole right now, and I think you should teach your girls Torah. If I had not learned Torah, I would not be here right now. So thanks for the education. All right. Rabbi Harold Kushner. This is actually in your Eitz Chaim Chumash. So if you want to read more on it, you can. From verse 28, which I didn't bring you, it's just 3 verses later. If the woman is found innocent, she will be able to, quote, retain seed, as foreseen that she will be restored to a life of love with her husband. Meaning, if she's found innocent, great, so nice, thanks, glad we did that ritual, let's go home, we can have more babies. Right, exactly what everyone wants to do after having to undergo this ritual, right? Like, yeah, let's have more kids. That's what we're excited about after doing the Sotah ritual. But even, he says, if the ordeal and a subsequent pregnancy turn the husband's heart back to his wife, what will it take to restore her trust in him and affection for him? Right, husbands at this time, as Rabbi Berenbaum mentioned earlier, for better and for worse, had the upper hand, right? Because they needed for there to be generations that came after them. So there was very real possibility that after this Sotah ritual, no matter how the woman felt, that they were going to go home and any time later, there were going to be children born to this relationship. That might be reality. And the husband might be able to say, oh, she was telling the truth. But how does the woman feel? Right? How can the woman possibly think that this is a loving relationship if she was accused of something and then humiliated because of that accusation, and then she was innocent? Right? How could you imagine being, and this goes back to Deborah's first point, that when dealing with an abusive relationship, way too often do we just stay stuck and think, all right, that was that one time, that's not going to happen again, and move on. But those feelings of anger and mistrust and all of that don't go away, right? This woman's never going to trust her husband again. No way. No way. Yeah, Rebecca. Okay. Which we don't know that there actually was, but if there was, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. I had never thought about that before, and I think that goes back to Deborah's point of domestic violence, right? Like, what's the better of the two evils, right? Is it to go through this, and if there was some kind of life, get rid of it so that life is not being brought into this world, right? That those cells don't turn into life into this world, and is there the possibility that this is kind of the better option of making sure that whatever now happens with this guy who at least he has some trust in her now that she's gone through this horrific ritual, and it'll just be on his terms. Again, like, as I'm saying this, I'm like, wow, this all sounds terrible, right? None of this sounds good, right? But I think we're choosing between those two evils. And you're right, like, maybe back in those days where women had no agency, was this a way for them to have a little bit of agency that they were actually being given, that they didn't even know that they had? Heather.
Like, he could be jealous every month.
Yeah, it's a good question. Right. So Heather's question was, is there a limit to how many times he's allowed to be jealous? I didn't go deeply into that question. I had the same question myself, and I didn't go into the text to see if there was an answer to that. Do you know off the top of your head, Rabbi Berenbaum? Right.
It doesn't say if the husband brings her back like 20 times.
Right.
Smash her upside the head.
Right. Right. If he comes back his third time, the priest says, "Just you're done here." Right.
A vexatious litigant. A vexatious litigant.
A vexatious litigant.
We don't necessarily have that here.
Right. Right. Well, we don't know that we have it here. Right. The other thing about the Torah, right, because it's such a brilliant question. The other thing about the Torah is that we get told of these, I'm going to say exaggerated for my point. I don't know that they were actually exaggerated, but we get these exaggerated stories. And I want to believe that we are told them because we needed to learn from the lessons beyond them, not because they were actually happening that often. So that doesn't mean that they didn't happen at all, right? There has to be, right, for every lie, there's a little bit of truth. So some story had to be made up of some reality or thought somewhere. But I think the fact that we don't, at least that I didn't come across, like a limit for this, that hopefully this wasn't a thing where a man was just, every 6 months, it's time to go back to the priest and do a little Sotah ritual. Okay. I want to get to Ruth Calderon and Aviva Zornberg, and then we're going to do Birkat. So someone think about who is really feeling Birkat tonight. Okay. Ruth Calderon. I'm going to skip around a little bit because it's a longer passage, but it says here, the biblical ritual of the Sotah was later anytime you want to bring her to Temple Beth Am, we'll have her. She's a fascinating and really heroic person in our era, and her book, A Bride for One Night, is a real piece of Torah, and everyone should read it and learn from it. And it's a very powerful book, which is what we're going to quote from right now. The biblical ritual of the Sotah was later tempered by the sages. They sought to abolish the ritual in an attempt to replace dramatic divine intervention with pragmatic human solutions. The sages encouraged the couple to separate by means of a financial agreement with as little hoopla as possible. The site of judgment was thus shifted from the temple to the courtroom. Moreover, in an effort to limit the practical application of the ritual, the sages created an intermediate stage in which the husband is required to state explicitly in the presence of two witnesses the identity of the man whom he suspects. We didn't read that part, that comes later. As a result, many women were saved from death and from the force of their husband's jealousy, and more important to the sages, the community was thus spared unnecessary upheavals and disturbances of the peace. So this gets back to what Deborah was bringing up. Deborah could have written this passage. Deborah brought up two of these pieces, right? One, that there was this financial kind of buy-in almost to the ritual being done. And second, that maybe this was a protection in some ways, that this was a way in which the women were being, or the couple or the community were being protected at the expense, obviously, of this woman, but protected from other things that could have been worse. The sages were averse to supernatural intervention. They preferred tranquility to truth, and they formulated principles that forged a new atmosphere in which jealousy was less rampant. By the way, Ruth, as Rabbi Berenbaum mentioned earlier, she's not in this passage. She is not talking about the Torah's interpretation of the Sotah ritual. She's talking about the Gemara's interpretation of the Sotah ritual. So when we're talking about sages here, we're talking about the rabbis writing about the Sotah ritual, not about the Torah's depiction, which we just read in Bamidbar.
She's really using, since the original was she's really using the word chazal.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I just didn't want people to think that the sages were referring somehow to like Moshe or God. But yes, Chazal. They preferred tranquility to truth, and they formulated principles that forged a new atmosphere in which jealousy was less rampant. These principles include most sexual acts are attributed to the husband. In other words, children of uncertain paternity are assumed to belong to the husband. In addition, they declared the man who raises the child and not the man who conceives it is considered the father. That is to say, fatherhood is constituted by the act of child rearing rather than procreation. Thus, the enlightened force of leadership won over more primitive ritual. Did this indeed improve the situation of women? It's hard to tell. No. As the story suggests, a woman suspected of adultery in the rabbinic period could find herself divorced with a child in her womb, abandoned and penniless without even a dramatic story to share. So she is taking a lens that many of you got to at different points throughout reading the text itself from the Torah, which is maybe there was something to this ritual to actually protect a woman, again, not without harm and not without humiliation and not without discomfort. And was it better than the alternative? Right. And she says it so beautifully in such a way that she's not uplifting the Sotah ritual to be this thing we should bring back in the 21st century, but she's saying that maybe there was something that our rabbis understood when they describe it again in the Talmud, that our rabbis understood about why this needed to be mentioned, taught, understood, continued to be taught as a way of which the woman had some agency. Oh, so you think that the Sotah ritual potentially limited the amount of times that a man would be willing to do that?
Absolutely.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, interesting.
I think that's quite embarrassing for men.
Sure. Right, and that piece of it we only hear from the Talmud, but right, that is a good point, that maybe the Sotah ritual from the male side of things, from the husband's side of things, was also so. I love that she uses the word hoopla in a book, right? That there was so much pomp and circumstance that maybe it also kept the man from doing this too many times, to go back to Heather's point. Okay, Aviva Zornberg, and then we're gonna do Birkat. So whoever's gonna lead, get ready. The adulterous woman embodies the anxiety of unreason. We could spend an entire 45 minutes just on that one statement. The normatively sane recoil from her madness. Fear turns into scorn and humiliation, for she carries with her a whole range of unfathomable experience, from insanity to folly. By the way, I didn't say this. Aviva Zornberg is a modern-day Torah commentator. Perhaps the most important feature of the Sotah episode is its ambiguity. The situation of the husband, the apparent subject of the passage, is one of doubt. Either his wife is guilty or she is innocent. The two opposing scenarios are enacted in the opening verses. Either she has in fact committed adultery, unwitnessed, undetected, and the husband's jealousy is justified, or else his jealousy is unjustified. Only in this situation, where her guilt or innocence can be decided in no other way, does the Sotah ordeal take place. In this case, divine aid is sought, and the general principle that issues are to be decided by due process, by witness, and by majority rulings is, in this exceptional case, set aside. So I wanted to bring this today, not because I think it's something that, we should all go out into the world and practice Sotah, but because I think that it's important for us to lean into the discomfort of our tradition as much as we uplift the things that we find beautiful. This is in our tradition in lots of different places, in the Torah, in the Gemara, in the Mishnah before the Gemara. We understand that this was something, whether or not it happened, we understand that this is something that was contended with by the Torah and also by our rabbis in a, quote, more modern day. So my hope is that you've come to understand this in a different way today. Maybe it's through this lens of Ruth Calderon or Aviva Zornberg, that there are ways in which the Sotah ritual, though it sounds terrible, were actually in a crazy way, and the sentence sounds bizarre to even say, helping a couple, helping a woman, helping a potentially unborn child, that there was something about it that was keeping holiness in relationship and in community. And for us to understand that sometimes in our tradition, there are things that are uncomfortable that we have to contend with for us to also understand the beautiful things in our tradition. So thank you for learning this with me. I hope you don't have nightmares. And we're going to, My guess is that there are in the Gemara. I didn't bring the Gemara sources because it's an entire Masechet, so I knew that it was going to be harder for us to get into the depths of that. But I'm sure there are in the Gemara. I could look for you and see. But that's where it would be if it's expounded anywhere, that's where it would be. Yeah. Wow. Courtroom quoting Dr. Seuss.
No, say it again.
There's a California appellate case called Zachariah D. Zachariah D. That was the name of the kid that quotes Dr. Seuss's book, Horton Hatches an Egg, in which Maisie the bird lays the egg and then abandons it. Horton stays with the egg through snow and sits on the egg and hatches it. And the court cites that book and says the guy who acts like the father is the presumed father.
So let's also say something else. This has real implications if you take it on the question of adoption. And
as opposed to like Misha Berach, which is...
Because we know who the mother is, and we accept the father as an act of faith.
Interesting.
Although in California now you can have a presumed mother if somebody does not raise the child. It's complicated, but it's kind of messy.
But it has on, for example, you say Kaddish, you say kosher for an adoptive parent, all of that. So there are real implications.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.